What's going on, everyone? You're listening to the My Aggie Nation Podcast. We got a special episode today dedicated to just looking back at the career and legacy of Texas A&M women's basketball coach Gary Blair. Joining us is the Eagle crew, Travis Brown and Robert Cessna. What's going on, guys?
Not much, just waiting, see basketball, baseball, whatever. There's a lot going on, and pretty soon track this weekend. I mean, softball. Oh my gosh, spring is here.
What's up with you, Travis?
Just cranking along. Just like C said, it's busy time of year.
Yeah, it certainly is. And coming out Wednesday, we've got a special section in the Eagle dedicated to the career of Gary Blair. Cease, I guess just cut to the chase. What's Gary meant to Texas A&M and just women's basketball at large?
Well, first of all, just look at the national championship. I mean, program that was dead last as the Big 12's concerned. And I understand the Big 12 is a pretty good women's basketball conference, still is. But when you're last and you look across the nation, or there wasn't a pulse, and then you go in and you win a national championship. And, let's be honest, it's one of the top four sports you've got to say, with football, baseball, men's basketball. And you can debate in some places whether it's softball or whether it's women's basketball. But in most instances, when you look at the national, it's women's basketball. So to win a national title there and to make 15 straight NCAA tournament runs, and just the ambassador that he is, he just has to come in here and won. He's come in here and tried to win over every person in Bryan College Station.
Yeah, in this special section, we went back and looked at all of Gary's coaching stops. You start at South Oak Cliff to La Tech, SFA, Arkansas. Cease, you talked with a ton of people from Gary's different stops. What were some of the common themes about Gary that people had to share and how he became the coach we all know him as today?
Just who he is. He's been so much to the game. He's allowed people to be themselves, and he's always gracious about the opponent. He always brags up women's basketball. I've had the pleasure of covering him, and I always remember he'd lose an NCAA tournament game. You see, coaches would have a rough time gathering themselves. They blame the officials. They do a lot of things. Gary would always praise the coach, and no matter who it was. And you think about it, and I always go back when Oregon coach, now who is ceases bad with names, but when he was at Gonzaga and his way up, that was a big deal for him to beat Gary, and then for Gary to go ahead and brag. He's bragged on all those coaches. And you can say his nose grew a few times because they just weren't that great at whatever. But Gary is always going to find the best in everyone. And I think that was a common theme. People would say that, along with he was such a great salesman, because he was going to make you like his product whether you wanted to or not.
Travis, one of your stories focused on Gary's time at Arkansas. From talking with people there, how did that coaching stint really springboard Gary into becoming a Hall of Fame coach eventually?
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas was the first shot that he had at kind of the major stage. Before that, he was at La Tech and he was at SFA. And from what he said, two places that they were able to make winners out of, but just weren't, of course, going to have the same kind of resources that Arkansas had. And he proved that he was able, and his staff was able to do it not only at kind of that mid-major level, but they were able to do it at the high level. And I think that it is pretty telling that while the year that they made the Final Four run, they did have a lot of seniors, and it was a team that was pretty veteran heavy. I don't think anybody necessarily expected them to make that kind of run. And it kind of just falls a little akin maybe to the national championship run that he had at A&M the couple of years later, in just that they were the it team. They had the they had the girls that had just that drive, and I think that came a lot from the coaching staff. But that's also kind of where his coaching tree really started, where you later Kelly Bond White would join on. That's where Vic Schaefer joined on, a lot of those guys, and so that kind of legacy that Gary left on women's college basketball. A lot of times, a lot of pieces of that were really forged there when he was at Arkansas, winning the WNIT, making it to the Final Four, and going to several NCAA tournaments while he was with the Razorbacks.
Yeah, Travis, you also wrote about Gary's impact in the community here in Bryan College Station. I guess for both of you, Travis, you can go first, but what do you think Gary's really meant to the community here in Bryan College Station?
I think that there is it goes beyond just what's happened on the basketball court. I think that Gary Blair has, for as good of a coach as he is and what he's been able to do on the court, he has proven himself even more as a marketer, as a community member, as a guy who will go out there. I mean, one of the funny stories we heard was the fact that just days after he got the job here from Arkansas, moved down, he was already going door to door to the houses in his neighborhood and pulling in different people from his staff to help introduce themselves, hand out tickets. And he knocked on a door once, and the door opened. A lady answered the door, and he goes, "Well, hi, I'm Gary Blair, and I'm the new women's basketball coach." And the woman stopped and said, I know who you are. And he goes, "Oh, well, how do you know who I am?" And she goes, I'm Shelby Metcalf's wife. This is our house. We're going to support you, and he was not afraid just to go knock on anybody's door, to show up to any restaurant. I know Steve Miller, his old SID and now one of the associate athletic directors for facilities, mentioned that he doesn't even like going to drive through places, fast food, because he wants to go in the restaurant and build relationships and hand out tickets and make sure people are there. And he wants the first time that you go to an A&M women's basketball game to be on his dime, so that when you come back and you've had so much fun, when you want to come back, you'll spend your money and want to support the team that way. And it's a strategy that's worked. And then you go on to his community service and what he's been able to do with the Special Olympics and the park for all kids there in College Station, and everything he's been able to do there. He's made probably even a bigger impact on the Bryan College Station community than he necessarily even has on the basketball court, and that's saying something for a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I got a chance to speak with some national and state writers about Gary's career and legacy, and everyone really seemed to come back to that 2011 season. Cease, you were covering the Aggies then. What are some of the key moments that you remember from that season? One that really is cemented in Aggie lore.
Well, you got to start out with Baylor. I mean, Baylor was the defending national championship. They'd Brittany Grider, they'd Kim Mulkey, and because Kim Mulkey and Blair were together at SFA, you could say it was like a little sister, big brother. Man, they're great competitors. I always loved covering the games with Kim Mulkey and Gary Blair. Different personalities, but both, man, they wanted to win so bad. And, A&M lost the first 3 games. It's well documented. That was a good team, but it looked like A&M was going to come up second best to Baylor, and that was going to be okay because they would go in different regions. And lo and behold, you could see that you could almost knock off Gary and the players when at the selection committee they were placed in the same region. It was almost like a kiss of death. What was the NCAA doing? And A&M took the positive approach and said, well, this will be our time. And you really wondered if it was, because they lost 3 times. There was no doubt Baylor was the best team in the regular season. Gary even said that when you read our stories this week in the section coming out. But the bottom line is A&M had gotten better each game. And then the Dallas Regional, when you go up there, and it was like probably 60% Baylor fans, because they bought those tickets ahead of time knowing that Baylor was going to be the number 1 team in the regional. You go to your closest geography in women's basketball at that time. I don't know what it is now. Maybe still be that way, but they're going to go to Dallas. So A&M had to get what was left and up on the second deck. So it was really a home game for Baylor, and A&M just jumped all over them. Sydney Carter, who's now on Gary's staff as like director of ops or something along those lines, had the game of her life, 22 points. Danielle Adams, she's worth the whole story in herself. She not only was a great offensive player, but she played her best defensive game that time against Griner tagging help with Adora Lanu. Bottom line is they just manhandled Baylor, and it went back to their point guards because Carter and Sidney Colson were seniors, and we'll never forget walking in and the losing coach goes first. And you could have fried eggs on Kim Mulkey's head. You could do that at any time when she loses a game. And somebody asked her, well, do you think she had Odyssey Sims, who's still in the WNBA, great player, but was a freshman. And someone asked her, do you think point guard play was the key? And some of her answer was like, what do you think? Are you going to ask Gary that question? Ask him that question, because, Gary had the two seniors, and, she did compliment it. That was the key, having senior leadership. Then I wondered, would they win if they went to the Final Four? Because you had Connecticut, it was waiting Stanford, and they still had some more, top seeds to deal with. And let's be honest, they got there. That was so much, but no, they went and played better than they did against Baylor. And the bottom line is they won a national championship. That was a special team. And to quote Gary, I hope I answered your question, Alex. I rambled there, and sorry for rambling, but what was the question again?
Something about the national championship season. Well, everybody's got a Gary story. Gary's just such a quotable, notable guy. What's some of y'all's top favorite maybe moments or interactions with Gary over the years? Travis, you can go first.
Yeah, I think in the season or two before the pandemic, one of my favorite notes was just having a side conversation with Gary about his golf game, because we all know Gary loves playing golf. Member out there at Traditions Club, and he has a sandwich named after him out there, a ham and cheese sandwich. So you can always find him on the golf course if it's off season. And someone was asking him about what kind of clubs he was using, and he said, well, he had his old clubs, but he got some new ones, and he's not sure if he's liking them. So he would for about a summer, he was taking a golf cart out and putting 2 full bags of like 32 clubs on the back of the golf carts and just hitting all of them just to see which ones he liked. And I think that's just so Gary to just have a golf cart weighted down with golf clubs just to figure out which ones he likes there out on the course doing that. That's one of my favorites up there. Cease, I know, is going to have a lot better ones.
I believe, going to have a lot better ones. Most of them I can't say. Because
yeah, I'm in that space too.
Gary's old school in the fact that he still trusts riders. So he goes off the record with me many times about a lot of things. And you respect that in a coach, because those days are gone because of cell phones and everything else. And, you worry about your reputation. Gary was Gary. And that's what makes sports what we're missing today, because people can't be themselves around the media. Because a good example, I was thinking the one that I can tell that you couldn't tell today, but he told back then, and we're going back maybe 10, 15 years. But Gary says a lot of times you go back and listen to those tapes, you probably would get in trouble. So one time after a game, and one player didn't play that well, and Cease was, I guess, kept prodding him about why that player played so bad. And finally, Gary's there, and of course, take recorders or whatever. And he said, like, well, she and it was a bad time of the month. Okay. And we're, oh, okay. But Gary would just speak his mind. As far as another thing that I can say on the record was, when I first started covering him, this is Gary again. I don't know where I was. And my wife called and said, hey, Gary Blair is trying to track you down. Gary Blair got my wife's cell phone number somehow before he got mine. This was early in our relationship, and he called my wife to tell her that I needed to call him. So, Gary is that kind of person that he just, he'll do anything for you, but he expects a lot out of you. He expects it out of the media, he expects it out of everyone, and that frustrates him at times, because no one works harder. He's 76 years old, and he's coaching today harder than he probably did when he was 28 or 29, whatever it was when he started.
Well, Any final thoughts from you guys? Travis, take it away.
Yeah, the biggest point that stuck out to me when I'm talking to a lot of these people, and especially a lot of the female athletes, is the fact that this is really kind of the turning of the page of an era, because Gary is the last of these head coaches that were around and really got their start because of Title IX, and when that really started to form, and you started to see women's sports forming and collecting. We're already on the second or maybe even the third generation of women's basketball coaches since that kind of landmark decision that opened those doors for some of those women athletes. And Gary was right on the cutting edge of that. I mean, it's fascinating to know that he was a baseball player that went and coached softball, that became a Hall of Fame women's basketball coach. And that's because some of those doors were just starting to get opened then, not only to those female athletes, but to some of these coaches to be able to coach those female athletes. And it really is kind of the end of an era, not only for Gary Blair, but for that first generation of coach that really saw doors open for females because of the passing of Title IX there in the early 70s.
Yeah, Cease, and one question to add to you. How big of shoes is the next A&M women's head coach going to have stepping in after Gary?
Well, Jake, let me ask the first question before the second one, but correct me if I'm wrong here, Alex. Another great Gary quote, and a lot of times he was wrong. Davis of the Dallas Morning News, people didn't know who is. That's one of Gary's favorite lines, goes, correct me if I'm wrong. And one of those press conferences, Gary said that about it 3 times. We walked out and Brian Davis grabbed me and goes, okay, Cece was wrong 3 times. And Gary's just was a sports writer's dream. But getting back to a couple of things that I want to point out, really tough him going out this way in one regard. This will be his worst season since the second year here when they went to WNIT. He's probably going to have a little better record or right even, but everything was on the upswing then, so people were excited. Right now, this A is a tough way to go out, but B, what I see in it, you realize how much you needed to appreciate Gary Blair in 15 straight NCAA appearances, because this is still a real bad place for women's basketball. They don't go out and support him like he should. You consider all the salesmen he does. What if this was Stanford, Tennessee? I get it, it's not, but he deserves better crowds than what he's gotten. And now everybody's saying, like, what's wrong with the team? Well, it's always been a great program. You don't know what you're going to miss now that he's gone. And touching on something that Travis said, Gary was a pioneer. When I was talking to Sonia Hogg, got to talk to a lot of different people at this time. And of course, she gave him his start in Louisiana Tech. One of the things that impressed her was, to quote her, Gary was successful in a girls' sport. A lot of women didn't like the fact that men were coaching, as they came up. You can go back to the last Final Four or whatever it was, when Muppet from Notre Dame, when she was talking about who would Tennessee hire or whatever, she said they'll make the right choice and hopefully it'll be a woman. You get it. You got to stick up for your, but Gary was able to win in a girl sport. And so I think that's very important. And Gary's just a trendsetter 1,000 times. Big shoes to fill, you betcha. Because not only that, now you're taking over a program that's having a crappy year. Let's be honest. You're not taking over something that's really smooth. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. I thought this team was good enough to get to the Sweet 16 when they got all the parts. But you know what? It hasn't worked out. This is not a good team. And that's a sad reality of it. But you know what? He's had 16 good ones before it. So when's the last time I got 16 out of 17 right on anything? Never.
I'm going to put you on the spot here because this is going to be just kind of picking your brain. But, he started his career at South Oak Cliff in 1973. I believe this year is the 50th anniversary of Title IX in 2022. Of those coaches that would have been able to say that they got their start right there at the beginning of that wave of Title IX, is Gary the last? I couldn't believe that there would be that many still around coaching that really got their grasp on it at the beginning of Title IX.
No, we went and looked at this last time. He was the oldest women's basketball coach, and I think he's the oldest men's basketball coach. Last year, we looked it up in Division One. Some of these other guys are in their late 60s or whatever, but Gary at 76 is by far the oldest. And so you're right. I mean, and if we're wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, go ahead. But we looked that up, and even Gary talked about that. And, but, touching on a lot of things I did in one story I wrote, you got to remember, Pat Summit, when she got her head coaching job, first head coaching job, she was 22. Gary was 40. So you consider he's won 852 games. What if he'd have started earlier in his career? He'd be well over 1,000. He'd be in the Naismith. He'd even be more honored than what he is. But I give Gary credit. He made up for lost time. Andy Lander is one of the greatest coaches, ever, also in women's basketball, whatever. He's 64. He's been retired for like 7 years, whatever. And Gary's been able to do at a later age also is very impressive. No one outworks him. The guy's 76 years old.
Well, thanks for joining on today and listening to just a little reflection on Gary Blair's career. Be sure to check the Eagle Wednesday's edition for our special section on Gary's career and legacy. And Cease, I believe we're going to be passing out some limited copies at the game on Thursday. Is that correct? As fingers crossed?
Okay, that's the plan. I was waiting on that call, though. I hope going this. That's the plan. And, I am a little bit older in the tooth as well. And I got to give kudos to Fred there as he picks his nose. Alex Miller, it was his idea to do this, Zoom with Blair's final game coming up on Wednesday, because I didn't think about it because it went in one ear and out. It's a big hole up there. So thanks to Alex Miller. Holy cow. He's learned from some of the best, Travis. Oh,
well, that's going to conclude this episode of the My Aggie Nation podcast. Be sure to check theeagle.com for all of our coverage on Gary's career and legacy. And we'll be back soon talking more things A&M sports.